All right, on to 3G regarding our confessions. The historical confessions and other doctrinal standards of the Reformed churches do not oppose resistance to powers that violate civil justice. The Westminster Confession of Faith, 20, Section 4, specifies that those who oppose any lawful power or the lawful exercise of it resist the ordinance of God. Tyranny is unlawful, not the ordinance of God, and may be lawfully opposed. The London Baptist Confession of Faith, 24.3, specifies that submission is only required to lawful things commanded. The Second Helvetic Confession of Faith, 30, similarly specifies obedience only to just and fair commands. The Belgic Confession of Faith, 36, specifies obedience only to things that are not in conflict with God's word, and denounces all, even civil powers, who would subvert justice. All right. So first question is, how are you defining, I think I get it, but how are you defining tyranny here?
Yeah, that is a good question. We don't address that directly in the subsection, but the simple distinction is this. If you went before an arbiter and you disagreed with the ruling, so let's say me and someone else have some dispute over, I don't know, theft or what have you, and, the judge, calls a strike when it's a ball or whatever, and so they get it wrong. That kind of situation is not itself tyrannical, right? So injustices are going to happen. People are going to get away with murder, and that's criminal. But what tyranny properly consists of, so the distinction from that we can make is any habitual, as the Reformers called it, or another term that we're all familiar with, you might say, is systemic, right? Related to the nature of the system itself, so that when people are functioning according to the design of the way the system is set up, it's unjust what they're doing. That's tyrannical. That's unlawful. That's tyrannous. Yeah. So just a decision you disagree with, or that you could even know for a fact, let's say, is not correct, you might want to appeal that if you can, but that's not itself tyranny. In any case, along with that, addressing that question, I should mention that although I don't think I reference it in the citations, put it in the references for this subsection, there is a bibliography of historical theology of Reformed thinkers sort of addressing political questions that are sort of behind these statements in the confessions, and we'll put that in the notes as well. I call that the Reformed Political Resistance Bibliography. In any case, we'll have it highlighted in the notes, and people can look at that.
Yeah, because I agree. I was pulling out my copy of Chad Van Dixhorn's, basically his commentary on the Westminster Confession of Faith. It's really good. And I was just, basically checking the text of the historic version, the 1788, 89 revision, and then the modern version. And, I was just having a conversation with a congregant yesterday, about how the fact that words have meaning, and that I may agree with the words that somebody wrote, but they might have a different meaning, different meaning behind the words, or different understanding of what they're saying. Because I affirm Westminster Confession 20, Section 4. I take no exceptions to that. to that section, and yet I have to think about what it's helpful to have resources that could communicate to us, what did the writers of these different confessions, what did they think was lawful and unlawful as they were writing this? Because I can affirm their words, but they may have something completely different in mind, a different framework, a different set of boundaries around what is lawful power or lawful exercise of it, and therefore resisting certain things in their perspective might be resistance to God, when to me, in my perspective, it may not. And so it's helpful to have resources, documents from the divines and other confession writers to help us kind of flesh out what they were thinking when they wrote these things.
Yeah, it's certainly true that, for example, the authors of the Westminster Confession and the Belgic Confession, approximately 100 years apart, where these people were establishmentarians, right? So they felt it was the duty of civil governance to have an established religion and to, with the power of the sword, put down heresies and blasphemies, and we reject that notion.
Right. Well, the Belgic
Unequivocally.
Confession was commissioned by a magistrate. So,
Right. And the Westminster,
he's like,
yeah, and Westminster Assembly was called by Parliament and so on.
Yeah. Funny story about that. There's this PCA church in the Midwest that bought a bunch of, they weren't like the PCA, OPC Trinity hymnals, but they bought a bunch of hymnals from a local Anglican church that was getting rid of them. And their church plant don't have a lot of money, so they were getting them for like $2 a hymnal. Great deal. Well, in these hymnals, there was like, how people will print like a sticker and have like a bunch of print on it. So this Anglican church basically posted a disclaimer about some of the stuff in the hymnal. I think maybe the Westminster Confession of Faith was in the back of it. And they basically said there was this regrettable period of time in the Church of England when a bunch of Calvinists had basically taken control. And this one particular king was a Calvinist. And so there's like, and it kind of basically gave like this 3-paragraph history lesson about what was going on in England. And so they were as non-Cal, because there are some Calvinist Anglicans in America today, but they're not obviously part of that group. They were just basically saying, there was this regrettable time, and so pay no attention to the man behind the curtain here on these particular pages. And anyway, I just thought, I saw that screenshot and I thought it was really, really funny. And,
well, that reminds me of some other history. There's a lot of, I guess, relevant material that we didn't want this statement to say everything. That wouldn't be useful. But historically, there's an important group of dissenters, you might call them. They were in the Puritan movement. They were allied with Cromwell's New Model Army until Cromwell decided he didn't like what they were saying, and that was the end of them. But the first organized libertarian movement were called the Levelers. Now, some of them sort of, as the years went on, defected to questionable views, but in any case, a substantial number of them were certainly Reformed believers, and they not only stood and argued for religious tolerance between, Baptists, Anglicans, Presbyterians, Congregationalists, but for false religions as well, and other natural rights. They articulated, and this is on the scene before Locke, right around the time of the Westminster Confession. And so in some ways that's our intellectual heritage, even if we're not aware of it.
Yeah.
And so these are Puritan libertarians, essentially.
Yeah.
And
And then
I
there's
think
certainly
that's
men like John Knox who, so much of his writings were, just hammering away at the unjust actions of men of power and magistrates, and often, sadly forgotten about. But anyway.
Yeah. So in that bibliography, actually, I don't think I have any levelers in there. I think most of the people are actually establishmentarians, but they're still advocating a perspective that we nonetheless want to affirm that's true about what it is that our confessional heritage in the non-establishmentarian or disestablishmentarian perspective is what we're confessing as a church.
Excellent. I look forward to reading the fuller bibliography, so I get I can then get more books that I won't read for a decade and fill up more shelves with them.
Happily, they're so old. A lot of them are online for free, so you don't have to buy anything.
Well, there you go. That's half the fun right out of it there, Greg. But
Yeah.
Good for my pocketbook though. So